As the sun set over Washington Monday, President Bush's coffin arrived at the Capitol. A hero's welcome heralded by cannons and a 21-gun salute.
The national religion of the United States is American exceptionalism. And we are now in the midst of a grotesque canonization of one of its imperial saints, George Herbert Walker Bush. Every media outlet in this country, every politician, Democrat and Republican, engaged in collective eulogy based on lies. Lies about who Bush was, lies about his policies, lies about the mass killing he oversaw during his life at the highest levels of power in the United States government. George H.W. Bush was an unrepentant war criminal who spent the overwhelming majority of his life making the world a worse place, a more dangerous place, and he leaves behind a global trail of tears, of bloodshed, of death and destruction. His legacy can be seen in the poverty and corruption of Central and Latin America. It can be seen in the never-ending killing fields of Iraq. It can be seen in the international criminals that he pardoned after Iran-Contra and the systematic violence of the so-called war on drugs. This legacy can be seen in the scourge of AIDS, the presence of a sexual harasser, Clarence Thomas, on the Supreme Court, who, in a sick irony of history, replaced Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice and a noble man. George H.W. Bush came from a powerful family. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth to a father who cozied up to the Nazis, desecrated the grave of the indigenous leader Geronimo, and whose businesses contributed to the imperial agenda of forcing the poor of the world into indentured servitude. This is the eulogy that George H.W. Bush should be receiving. Instead, we have this.
Throughout his long life, George Bush was admired as a man of decency, modesty, and uncommon achievement.
I just want to get up into heaven, and I don't get there by bragging on myself. My mother told me that years ago.
George Herbert Walker Bush today is being remembered as a great man and as a gentle soul.
The 41st president honored today not just as a statesman, but as a father and neighbor. The Houston Symphony paying tribute to his love of colorful socks.
The U.S. and international news media are engaging in sick propaganda. Leave the stories about how classy he supposedly was, how cool his marriage was, how he built a father-son relationship with Bill Clinton, how much he liked Barack Obama, how he always wore those funny socks. Leave all of that to the family in their private memorials. But for the rest of us, for the rest of the world, we must remember that his incalculable crimes were committed in public, from the highest chambers of power in the most dominant nation in the world. The accounting for his crimes should also be done in public. But no, we're told we have to have respect. We're told that now is not the time to discuss any of this. We're told that we must pretend that he was not a mass murderer with so much blood on his hands. Donald Trump doesn't have enough time left in his life to commit even a fraction of the international crimes that George H.W. Bush carried out during his decades in power at the CIA, as vice president, and ultimately as president. Not even close. Journalists today believe that they're so brave in calling out Trump's lies, in investigating his real estate deals, in probing his associates, and yet none of them have the spine to accurately describe the well-documented, indisputable crimes committed by George H.W. Bush. What we are witnessing is a powerful media class and an elite political class whitewashing the life of a man who used his various positions not to make the world a better place, but to wage unthinkable wars, to undermine democratic movements, to kill innocent people, to orchestrate coups and invasions. And the reason no one talks about these crimes is because it's a sacrilege to do so in the American religion of exceptionalism.
I'll never apologize for the United States of America. Ever. I don't care what the facts are.
When an unarmed black man is shot dead by the police in this country, the media is often flooded with stories about how they were troubled kids, how they had criminal records, or they were drug users, how they had run-ins with the law. The pictures used in these stories are often ones where the men are presented as thugs or as scary. Journalists probe deep into the lives of Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Eric Garner.
The jury in the George Zimmerman murder trial is expected to learn today that Trayvon Martin had marijuana in his system when he was shot.
These are the final moments of 18-year-old Michael Brown. So we've taken you inside of this convenience store. We've heard from Ferguson police that they say he was without a doubt involved in what they call a strong-arm robbery.
Shortly after the funeral ended, one of several search warrants connected to the investigation became public record. The list of some of the items seized from Botham Jean's apartment, including a small amount of marijuana.
News organizations did everything in their power to smear these black men in death with absolutely no regard for their families or respect for their humanity. If George H.W. Bush was treated the same way as these black men, it would take months of nonstop 24/7 coverage to even begin to describe the tip of the iceberg of the unforgivable deeds that Bush committed. Why? Because he committed his crimes as President of the United States, and the nature of his crimes was imperial. He did it with bombs and tanks and invasions and coups. In watching the gross hagiography on display this week, I'm reminded of the quote from Voltaire: "It is forbidden to kill, therefore all murderers are punished, unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets." That is who George Herbert Walker Bush was, a man who killed in large numbers to the sound of trumpets. You want to talk about disrespecting the dead? Let's talk about the 400 people that Bush incinerated in a Baghdad bomb shelter in February of 1991. How does this celebration of their murderer and his sense of humor and funny socks feel to their families? And let us remember the so-called highway of death, where Bush authorized the mass slaughter of retreating Iraqi military units, bombing thousands of vehicles and killing untold numbers of soldiers in retreat.
They turned it into a trash heap.
Pilots called the 3-mile-long stretch of charred bodies and vehicles the highway of death. Initial reports were of tremendous carnage, thousands dead.
Now, we all know that Bush's son, George W. Bush, lied the U.S. into the invasion and occupation of Iraq. But it was a lesson that he learned from his dad. In the build-up to the 1991 Gulf War, powerful public relations firms orchestrated a campaign to convince the world that Iraqi soldiers had gone into Kuwaiti hospitals and killed babies in incubators and stabbed pregnant women. This campaign, based entirely on fiction, culminated with a bipartisan congressional hearing supposedly on human rights. It featured a young Kuwaiti girl who fought back tears as she claimed to have been a volunteer at a hospital in Kuwait where she witnessed these atrocities.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying.
What the public was not told at that time was that this little girl was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. This whole thing was orchestrated by powerful American PR firms. And this girl had witnessed none of these fake crimes. But the lies were repeated over and over as Bush made his case for war.
They had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Both U.S. wars against Iraq were based on lies, and both were run by presidents named Bush. If you speak honestly about who George H.W. Bush really was, then you, by necessity, will be indicting the history, the politics, the legacy of the United States. If you speak honestly about Bush, then the myth of American exceptionalism is laid bare.